Welcome to demo number 3 for your still life painting. So today we are going to finish it off. Hooray! At this point, I've got my beautiful black and white rendering with all the different grays and mediums and middles in between. And now I'm going to work on adding color. So what we're going to do is we're going to glaze layers of transparent color over the black and white areas, and it's just gonna like pop to life and feel colorful. So on my palette, I have a variety of colors. So I've looked at my still life. So I've got a lot of blues in there, some red, some purple, and then a couple browns and a little bit of kind of light brown yellow. So on my palette, I've got colors to match that. I put a little green because I want to push one of those blues a little bit greener. Now you may not have as many blues, but again, you can always mix the color you want. So put as many colors on your palette as you think you'll need. And then what I have is a whole bunch of not white. I don't have any white or black on my palette. This is gloss medium. So this is going to help make your colors more transparent, and it's also going to give your paint kind of a glossy feel, which will help create this sense of kind of depth that we're going for with this technique. And then I have a bunch of retarder as well, and that always just helps me move the paint around easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mix up some different paints. So I'm going to start with this red here because I think that'll pop nicely, and I think that'll be a simple one. Now, my still life is kind of easy in that many of these colors, like this blue is just going to be the same color blue, right? It's got lights and darks, but it's the same color blue because it's a toy. However, I'll demo with the Kleenex box. You'll be able to see kind of a way of like moving from blue into purple. So I don't have all the details of the Kleenex box, but I'll show kind of how you transition from one color to another, because not all of your objects will be just purely like this color or this color. Like they'll kind of move in and out, especially if you're doing some fruit. So I'll show how to do that. But let's start. I'm just going to start with the red. And I'm going to mix up. And the reality is you only need, I grabbed way too much red. You only need a tiny bit, and then you're going to grab a lot of medium, a little bit of retarder. And it's going to look like it's very intensely red. But because you have so much medium, it's going to become very transparent, which is good. Just like everything we're doing with this, just like everything we're doing with this painting, the more that you do kind of transparent thin layers and build those up, more and more layers, it's just going to look better. So you want to be careful that you don't have too much paint with your medium, that it's not like suddenly that you haven't created something opaque. So I have a piece of paper here where I'm going to test things. And actually, I'm going to take a Sharpie and just do some scribbles, because that way I'll be able to see how opaque or transparent my paint actually is. Clean off my palette knife. There we go. Okay. And for this, you really want a soft brush. So if you have brushes that are a variety of like stiff or soft, go for that very soft brush. So I'm going to take my red and I'm just going to practice, get it it's a little bit gunky. So that looks nice and transparent, you can see. So now I'm going to use it, tiny bit of water in there, not too much because I don't want it to be too streaky. And I'm just going to put it so down here, as always, start with the edge and then move in. And this brush might actually be a little too big for this, so I might move to a smaller brush. But for now, let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna move to a smaller brush. Okay, so right now it feels kind of like a badly tinted photograph. So again, I'm gonna let that layer dry and then come back in with probably 1 or 2 more layers of that same red. Now this is where mixing in a lot of the retarder keeps the paint on my palette pliable and not drying out, and that helps me. But while it's drying, I'm gonna transition to kind of mixing up like a purple and a blue and kind of showing how to blend those. So I'm gonna mix both of those colors and maybe actually one in between. Again, I'm gonna test the transparency of my colors. So, looks pretty good. It's a little bit thicker. Darker colors go darker. Yeah. As long as I paint them thin, they're okay. I'm not only just testing the transparency, I'm also looking at the color to be like, is that the color I actually want, or do I need to mix a different, some different pigment in? But, so I'm gonna start just kind of in the top left with the more blue. And I wanna make sure I don't make it too thick. The medium, when you're using it, it does kind of feel a little bit opaque. It's a little bit like Elmer's glue, where initially it's white, so it has a little bit of opacity. But then as it dries, it becomes more clear. So I'm gonna put a little bit of blue over here too. And then while it's still wet, I'm gonna kind of like try to just sort of feather it out. And it's best to do this actually with a dry, clean brush, but it's sort of working with this brush. And then I'm gonna clean the brush, make sure it's not too wet, because if it's wet, I'll just start moving paint around again. And then grab some of my purple and kind of work into the blue. And again, a soft brush kind of just helps you do more transitions a little bit better. And I can, as long as I don't care too much, like because these colors are getting mixed eventually, I can kind of go back and forth a little bit. I always want to be careful with my edges though. I'm moving over the overlapping some of the purple and the blue so that it feels like they transition well. And again, I can kind of pull out, feather out the purple, feather out the blue so that there's not like a harsh overlap. Make sure nothing feels too thick or too thin. So while I've done this, my red has dried. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to, instead of like going and doing a first layer on everything, while I have these paints mixed up, I'm going to toggle back and forth until I feel like I get the colors right on those two areas, because I've got the paints mixed, they're wet, they're pliable, and I think as I go back and forth, I'll be able to like let the one layer dry and work on the other layer. As I do the layers, one of the things I want to make sure is that it's very transparent, that the darks and the lights that I painted in my so this is called the underpainting, that I'm not losing those, that I'm not completely covering them with new paint, because you put a lot of work into them, and if you lose them, then you have to go back in and find those darks and those lights, and that can be really frustrating. So that's why I want to do really thin, really transparent layers of paint, and as I'm painting, make sure that I don't lose that completely. Apologies for the screaming toddler upstairs. It's been a day. Okay. Now I can go back into this one, but it's actually, that purple is still a little bit wet. So what I might do is I might work on I might do this blue, or just pick a different area to work on, mix up one more set of colors, because I might need to, I painted that a little bit thicker than maybe I should have. I think it'll be okay for the Kleenex box, but So that feels like a good amount for the red. If I do too much more, I'm gonna lose the lights and the darks. I'm gonna do another layer of the blue, but I'm gonna add more medium because since it wasn't as transparent as some of my other ones, if I keep doing layers, I'm gonna lose the light and dark detail that I had. So a couple things to notice. as it's drying, number one, it is dry, but there's still a shine that comes from that gloss medium, and ultimately the whole painting is going to have a little bit of gloss, and that will be really nice. It adds kind of some depth. Also, even though it has dried clear and transparent, it makes everything darker than it used to be. So remember how I said, like, you want to do the black and white rendering, but you want to push it a little bit lighter than you intend. This is why. So if you are watching this before you've started in on the colors and you're thinking, I'm not sure if it's light enough, maybe do one more quick wash, lightening your values just a little bit. I'll be able to pull some lighter areas back out. But it just makes a little bit more work for me because it's gone so dark, but it's not impossible. So now I'm just going to mix up the other colors and finish doing the main colors on all the rest of the areas. Okay, so I've got everything covered with a layer of color that needs to be, and already it feels pretty magically transformed. So the nice thing about doing it this way is that uh, initially you just worry about the values, right? The lights and the darks of things. And then when you do the colors, you just worry about the colors. You don't worry about the relative lights and darks of colors. But now we're gonna add a few details to pop this out. Like, it feels pretty good, but it still has a few areas that we can like really make it start to sing. And so we're gonna add just like a few more finishing touches to bring, especially to bring some of those light areas back out. So now we need to worry, when we're mixing colors, we need to worry about both the color, the hue, but also how light or dark it is, the value. And so that's where on my new palette, I needed to add a new palette. So I've got two going on. I added white and black, and we're gonna mix up more opaque paints. So we're not gonna mix in the as much medium as before. You can still mix in some retarder if you want. Don't worry that things are kind of looking like some parts are glossy and some parts are matte. We're gonna do a final coat with the gloss medium that will just kind of make everything seem like it fits together seamlessly. So we're down to the details now, and you really need to kind of evaluate yeah, what we're gonna do with those details. So I'm gonna go back into my otter, and I sort of, because it was easier, I painted the brown over his eyes. So I'm gonna reestablish the black and the white of the eyes. On the airplane, I'm gonna establish some more of the highlights in the blue areas and on the head, and the kind of finish off, make the details on the head look perfect. On the fish, again, I'm going to kind of go back into the eye, but then also bring some of the highlights back out in these areas. One thing to note, the bottom of my fish is white, and so I didn't glaze any color over the top of it because I didn't need to. However, if you have a lot of white things in your still life, you might look and see, like, does it have a small tint? Is it slightly yellow or slightly blue? And it can make it feel more interesting and more alive if you give it just a tiny tint. But that's going to mean like just a tiny, tiny bit of paint and a lot of medium. But that can help, especially if you have multiple white things, like differentiate between the two white things, so it does feel like this is a color painting and not just a black and white photo. So here I go to do the details. Okay, I think I'm done. It's not perfect and I could keep poking at it. But one of the things that's really important in this final step is that you don't actually recover everything you did. So you notice that like in certain areas, like I pushed it darker or brought little highlights out, but main areas of color I didn't touch. And one of the reasons is when you start adding white or dark, you start to dull the color. And when you do the color over the dark and the light, the glazing like we did, it really makes the color sing. So everywhere that I put some light parts or even some dark parts, the color is not as vibrant as it is in the areas where I was just glazing. So that's one of the reasons that you don't want to just repaint the whole thing. You just want to pull certain areas out. Be like, where are the dark parts, where are the light parts? You can see I just kind of reestablished some of the shine and some of the shadows in all of these things. As I was doing the dolphin and the airplane, I realized I hadn't been mixing the retarder in, which made it harder to kind of smooth out some of the things that I didn't want to be just a brush stroke. And so when I added a little bit of retarder back in, I was able to smooth out some of those areas nicer. So I should have done that in some of these areas. Now I'm going to let this dry completely, and then I'm going to do one last thin, even glaze of just the gloss medium to make everything kind of smooth out together, and then I will be done.